If you're into powerful sci-fi tales where humanity proves why Earth is called a death world, you're in for a wild one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What would you do if you were the last human on trial by a galactic court? Now, let's dive in. They called him the last human. In the center of a crystalline tribunal orbiting a fading red sun, Elias Reign stood bound by radiant chains, the kind that didn't touch the body but crushed the soul. Around him, 100 alien delegates sat in judgment, their forms casting distorted shadows against the transparent dome. Some were cloaked in rippling biosilk, others armored in carapace or stone. One delegate had no body at all, only an orbiting cloud of metallic spores that whispered in pulses of light. All eyes, organic or otherwise, were on Elias. He didn't flinch, didn't plead. His stance was worn but upright, his jumpsuit torn from age and wear. A ragged beard clung to his face like roots gripping dry soil. The tribunal chamber was sterile, engineered to erase scent, sound, and emotion. Yet Elias's presence disturbed that perfect neutrality. He smelled faintly of ozone and old leather. He stared back at his accusers with a gaze that suggested he had already died once, and didn't fear doing it again. A towering arbiter, Judge Vectal, unfolded from its throne like a collapsing structure in reverse. It resembled a column of obsidian plates stacked on living muscle, voice vibrating through bone more than air. Elias Reign, designated last representative of soul origin Homo sapiens. You stand accused of crimes against ecological stability, sovereign boundaries, and the mass death of 4 inhabited biospheres. How do you plead? Elias's lips twitched. Not a smile, not quite. More like a muscle remembering how. I plead what you already believe, he said calmly. That I'm guilty, for surviving. The room bristled with murmurs, translated across dozens of languages. One delegate, a crystalline vine woven into a hovering frame, swayed violently. Your species didn't merely survive. You conquered, it hissed. You unleashed apex biology into contained environments. You disrupted entire food chains. Your so-called rescue missions collapsed entire ecosystems. You made predators gods. And prey slaves, chimed another, its voice like blades scraping glass. Elias remained still. I didn't bring death, he said. I brought balance. We just didn't balance it your way. A hiss of frustration echoed from the gathered diplomats. They weren't here for philosophy. Another judge, a gelatinous mass encased in a shell of glass and gold, spoke next. Where are your people, human? Earth is ash. The colonies have vanished. Your armadas are rust. Why do you still resist when your kind has already accepted extinction? Because we didn't die, Elias answered. We adapted. While you labeled us a threat, we evolved. While you painted us monsters, we became myth. Laughter, jarring, discordant, rippled from a delegate shaped like a spider made of knives. Ah yes, the legend of the Deathworlders. The species born of poison air and bone-breaking gravity. You've weaponized your own reputation, human. But myth cannot save you from judgment. And fear, Elias said softly, cannot absolve you of what you've done. The chamber dimmed slightly. A signal. The court was preparing for sentence. Judge Vectal's voice reverberated with finality. Elias Reign, this tribunal finds you guilty on all counts. You are hereby sentenced to termination by radiant dispersal. You will be unmade atom by atom, to prevent any posthumous contamination or influence. The chains around Elias began to hum, tightening with invisible force. Above him, the dispersal lens lowered from the ceiling like the eye of a mechanical god. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not fear. Not anger. Something stranger. Relief? You know what's funny? Elias said, raising his head to meet the lens directly. You never asked why I surrendered. The tribunal paused. A long, hesitant silence spread like a crack in the floor. He looked toward the stars, toward a patch of darkness beyond the dome where nothing moved. You assumed I was running, that I was alone. But I came here by choice. The radiant lens halted. Judge Vectal stiffened. Explain. Elias's voice was almost a whisper now, as if meant for someone far beyond the room. I came to warn you, he said, that you've made the same mistake again. You thought humanity died because you couldn't see us anymore. But extinction doesn't look like silence. It looks like strategy. Something in the silence changed. The darkness beyond the dome wasn't empty anymore. Dozens of delegates shifted, glancing uneasily toward the viewport. The stars, those ancient constants, seemed subtly wrong. One of the judges tapped its comm rune, but the device sparked and died. I'm not the last, Elias said. The power flickered. Just a blink. Then the growl came. Oh, primal. Not mechanical, not manufactured. The kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms rise, even if you're a species that has no hair. It was not a roar. Not yet. Just the warning before it. Inside the tribunal, the sound caused delegates to freeze mid-motion. Their guards raised energy spears. The dome's defense protocols initiated, glowing faintly blue. What is that? One alien whispered. Elias closed his eyes. That, he said, is who you feared we might become. You were right. The hum of the dispersal chains died. A new light filled the chamber, dim, organic, pulsating through the floor like veins carrying hot blood. Vectal took one step back. This is impossible. No ships approached. No signals. Nothing entered orbit. No ships needed, Elias replied. Far above the station, massive shadows began to peel from the stars. Living shadows. They didn't move like machines. They moved like creatures. Then the dome cracked. Just a thin web at first, a single fracture from one point in the crystalline surface. But it spread, fast, precise, like a claw had gently traced its nail across the sky. The delegate screamed. One activated an emergency phase jump, but the panel exploded in its hand. Systems offline. All comms down. Only Elias remained calm, his eyes reflecting a slow, deliberate glow now approaching from beyond the fractured dome. You shouldn't have declared extinction on something you didn't understand, he said quietly. We didn't just survive. We made friends. Judge Vectal roared, what are you talking about? What is out there? Elias tilted his head. You called us apex predators. We never disagreed. But we weren't alone. We never were. And then came the sound again, louder, deeper, like continents shifting beneath flesh. A war cry from the void, spoken in no known language but understood by all. The death world had answered. And it had brought company. The first time Elias Reign met a true apex predator, he was 16 years old and unarmed. The mission had gone sideways. A supply drop intended for a frontier research colony on Ganymede had crash-landed in the hunting territory of a Varokian razor beast, a species classified as planetary extinction-grade threat by every interstellar database. Elias, then just a junior logistics cadet aboard the Terran vessel Hope's Answer, volunteered for retrieval before higher command could say no. The razor beast wasn't what he expected. Curled beneath the broken wing of the supply drone, the creature bled slowly, a long tear exposing bone and sinew under cracked black scales. It was barely more than a juvenile, its tusks still dull, mane underdeveloped. But even at half-grown, it could have killed Elias in seconds. Instead it whimpered. He remembered the sound. Not pain exactly. Not rage. Just loneliness, like the echo of something ancient finally being forgotten. Elias didn't back away. He removed his helmet, knelt beside it and, against every protocol, placed his bare hand against the razor beast's heaving side. It didn't bite. That was the day something in Elias Reign changed. Not softened. No, the boy who returned from that mission was not softer. But he was realigned. As though he had glimpsed a version of survival that didn't require annihilation. A kind of peace built on respect rather than domination. Years later, as humanity's final colonies were scorched from the record, that lesson remained. The galaxy never forgave Earth. When the solar collapse destroyed the Terran homeworld, it should have ended the war. No more central power, no more influence. Yet the fear lingered. The idea of humans, a species from a death world, capable of thriving in extremes that melted most life forms, continued to haunt the galactic psyche. And so the purge began. Not an open war. Something colder. Bureaucratic. Sanctioned. One by one the outer colonies were dismantled. Diplomatic ties severed. Human outposts were declared biothreats, and their populations relocated. Ships vanished. Names were struck from registries. No bullets fired. Just silence. But Elias didn't die with them. He disappeared into what the galaxy called the Dead Rim, a stretch of wild, unstable systems populated only by failed terraforming projects and quarantined lifeforms too dangerous to study. That's where the alliances began. It wasn't about taming monsters. That had never been his goal. It was about mutual understanding, about finding the survivors of other extinction campaigns. The galaxy had many such victims. Creatures too strong, too unpredictable, too free to be tolerated. Predators labeled hazards, wiped out not for what they did, but for what they might do. Elias found them. A plague wing colony nesting in the wreckage of a poisoned asteroid belt. The last cryo-siblings of the Skarn wolves, hunted for their neural song. The fire-blooded bears of Lorithex, whose very existence bent gravity when they stood still too long. And others, creatures without names exiled before language reached them. Elias didn't lead them. He didn't need to. He offered them a choice. Follow him, not to war but to acknowledgement. He taught them silence when silence was safety, patience when survival demanded retreat. And in return they gave him loyalty, the kind forged not by domination, but by shared exile. He never forgot what it felt like kneeling beside that razor beast pup, seeing power not as a threat but as something abandoned. That razor beast had a name now. Kor. Fully grown, plated in thick armor and scars from battles against things too old for stories, he had become Elias's shadow. Others called him a mount. Elias never once rode him. They walked together. Still, none of that mattered in the tribunal. Not the history. Not the sacrifices. The galaxy had already decided what humanity was. A threat wrapped in myth. A justification for fear. Elias had hoped his surrender might open a conversation. That maybe, just maybe, one species among the hundreds would look past the propaganda. Would see the quiet behind his eyes. Would ask the right question. They didn't. And so he signaled. Not a transmission. Not a call. Just a word. Spoken in a forgotten dialect. Older than Earth, older than history. A frequency designed not for technology, but for minds attuned to instinct. The beast heard. The first to stir was Kor. Orbiting in silence aboard a hollowed moonship made of bone and resin, his massive lungs vibrated with a single resonant tone. Across the dead rim, others responded. The firebloods, hardened creatures of molten endurance, broke orbit from their gravity-forged forge world. The sky serpents of Talveen uncoiled from the moons they'd consumed, slithering into vacuum with no engines, no drives, just raw biomomentum. Even the song lions, blind creatures who communicated in resonant harmonics, felt the call and howled into the warp, scattering communication webs with a single collective note. They didn't come with weapons. They were the weapons. Back in the tribunal, Elias kept his expression blank. The chains had tightened around him. The dispersal lens had powered up. And yet, his mind remained elsewhere, on the stars. On the friends who had risked extinction again and again to remain unseen, waiting for a word. He had spoken it. Not out of vengeance, but because the court had asked a question. One they didn't realize they were asking. Why did he come alone? And the answer was simple. He didn't. Now, within the hollow chamber, Elias felt the fear finally settle in. Not in himself, but in them. The judges. The diplomats. The enforcers. They all began to understand too late that their myth had failed them. That their image of humanity as a relic, an artifact to be condemned, had never accounted for what might crawl out of the silence they had created. Elias wasn't here to escape. He was here to bear witness. The first breach hadn't yet occurred. The sky hadn't cracked. The creatures hadn't arrived. But the stillness had changed. Somewhere outside the range of sensors, instinct had already taken root. And when predators moved, true predators, they didn't announce themselves. They waited until it was far, far too late. Elias exhaled once. A quiet, thoughtful breath. Like someone remembering the smell of rain just before a storm. Then he opened his mouth and said just one more word. Not in English. Not in any known language. A word with weight. A word with teeth. And across the stars something began to move. The story wasn't over. It was waking up. The first sign of their arrival was the silence. Not the usual kind, the heavy, reverent hush that filled courtrooms or war rooms or funeral halls. No, this was deeper. This was silence stripped of comfort, peeled of meaning, the kind that made breathing feel like trespass. It rolled through the tribunal like a pressure wave from the void, causing translators to stall, lights to flicker, and for one terrible moment, the great galactic judiciary itself to pause mid-sentence. Then came the vibration. Subtle like the pulse beneath ancient stone. At first no one noticed. Then the floor began to hum with it. Not mechanical. Organic. Like the heartbeat of something impossibly large. Judge Vectal was the first to react. His obsidian-plated frame shivered with unease, a reaction that hadn't registered in centuries. He turned toward the eastern arc of the dome where the protective crystalline veil began to shimmer faintly, then pulse in time with the tremor. Report, he ordered, voice fracturing into subtones meant to summon emergency counsel. No reply. The tribunal's command network had gone dead, no signals in or out. Hollow screens flickered with static, languages scrambled, failsafe systems looping in recursive failure states. Another tremor. This one unmistakable. The galactic courtroom had been engineered to withstand bombardments, solar flares, gravitational distortions. Every known threat accounted for. But it had never accounted for them. Elias Reign stood motionless, still bound in radiant chains that no longer shimmered. His eyes had shifted. Not wide with hope or satisfaction, but settled, like a storm long held in restraint had finally found permission. "They're here," he murmured. The judges heard him but didn't understand. One of the diplomatic envoys, a creature composed entirely of breathable gases and electromagnetic impulses, began to waver. Its form spasmed in distortion as the frequencies around it became hostile. It shrieked, unintelligibly, and collapsed into vapor. A heartbeat later, the dome cracked. Not shattered. Not blasted. Cracked. Carefully, surgically, as if a single claw had traced a path from the outside. The dome groaned, crystalline lattice buckling, no alarms triggered. The station systems weren't built to recognize what approached as a threat, because what approached had never existed on their charts. From above, a shadow fell across the tribunal. Not a ship. No engines, no emission trails. Just darkness, moving with intent. One of the judges, a high chancellor from the aquatic worlds of Drawl, floated up from her seat and pressed against the dome's interior. Her voice, watery and panicked, was the last coherent thought before instinct overtook protocol. "That's not a vessel. That's a creature." The thing outside tilted its massive body. It was shaped like a serpentine bird, all sleek iridescent armor and wings that shimmered with absorbed starlight. Eyes like burning moons peered through the dome, unblinking. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, drifting in loose formation, came a swarm of apex organisms. Life forms from death worlds, each one considered myth, legend, or extinction-level danger. Some swam through vacuum on solar radiation, their fins spread like living sails. Others crawled across debris fields, dragging moons behind them. A few were invisible entirely, outlined only by the gravity they bent in passing. Panic erupted in the chamber. Delegates scattered, forgetting dignity. Judges screamed orders to systems that no longer obeyed. Security forces formed a ring around Elias, their weapons trained on him, trembling. "Call the fleets," someone shouted. "There are no fleet responses," another yelled. "The comms are down, jamming fields biological." Elias blinked slowly. "They're not jamming," he said. "They're speaking. You just never bothered to learn the language." The guards raised their rifles, energy cores glowing. Elias turned his head and gave them a look. Not a glare. Not defiance. Just understanding. "They won't let you hurt me." That was when the wall gave in. Not exploded. Dissolved. A section of the tribunal's eastern barrier simply vanished in a rush of mist and steam as a massive figure stepped through the breach. Not a beast. Not a brute. But something regal. Queen Veshra. She stood over 4 meters tall, her armor grown from living fungus and bone, plated with iridescent beetle shells. Her head was crowned with thorn-like horns, and her mouth opened horizontally in 4 directions when she spoke. She did not roar. She announced, "This human is under my protection." The room stilled. Veshra's voice rang without translation, yet every being in the room understood. She did not offer negotiation. She did not make threats. She simply declared reality. From the breach behind her, others entered. A pair of scarn wolves padded in, their eyes glowing like molten copper, breath forming frost despite the artificial atmosphere. Behind them, a lava bear lumbered forward, its fur smoldering with embers, eyes like black suns. Song lions crawled across the ceiling, vibrating the air with notes so deep they were felt in bone, not heard. The security guards faltered. One dropped his weapon. Another simply ran. Elias's chains dissipated like steam. Veshra extended a clawed hand toward him. He took it without hesitation. She turned to the room, eyes narrowing. "You judged him for surviving. For protecting. For refusing to kneel. He gave us language, taught us restraint, shared shelter when your kind hunted us for sport." Her gaze pierced the judges. "He did not come to destroy you. He came to ask if you were still worth saving." No one responded. Vectal tried to speak, but his throat lock froze his vocal cords. Whether from fear or pride, it didn't matter. Elias stepped forward now, unchained, the beasts flanking him like sentinels. "You were afraid of what humanity could become," he said. "You were right to be afraid." He stopped in the center of the chamber, beneath the shattered dome. "But not because we were monsters. Because we refused to become them. The galaxy had erased Earth. But it had not erased Elias Reign. And now, neither could it erase those who had answered his call. Outside, more shadows gathered. Inside, no one moved. The trial had ended. The judgment had changed hands. And what came next would not be written by politicians or soldiers. It would be decided by predators. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. The tribunal chamber, once the sanctum of galactic authority, had become a hunting ground. Not because claws had drawn blood or fangs had torn through flesh, but because the balance of power had shifted so utterly that words no longer held sway. Laws were just echoes. Justice a ghost. All that remained now was truth. And truth had just walked in on 4 legs, wings and molten paws. Elias stood surrounded by the apex, the ones the galaxy had tried to bury, silence, erase. Their presence was not chaotic. It was measured, controlled. Each creature held itself back and in doing so, radiated a far more terrifying message than if they had attacked. They were capable of restraint, which meant their violence, if it came, would be deliberate. He turned not to the beasts but to the judges. I stood trial, he said evenly, because I believed in the possibility of justice. Even after what you did to Earth. Even after you hunted down my people, declared our biology a contagion, made us monsters so you could sleep easier at night. I still came here, hoping you'd look me in the eye before condemning what you didn't understand. The silence held. 100 delegates. 100 species. Not one met his gaze. Elias nodded to himself. Then took a slow breath. But you didn't look. You never have. Vectal stirred, the obsidian plates along his neck twitching as if something under the surface wanted to escape. He tried to step forward, perhaps out of duty, perhaps to salvage what little illusion of order remained. What do you want, human? He rasped. Revenge? Retribution? You have your army. Burn the station if you must. Just say it. Elias blinked. His face revealed no rage. Only a deep and sorrowful certainty. I don't want your fear, he said. You've given me that already. I want you to understand what it means to be the prey for once. I want you to feel how it tastes when someone decides your kind is inconvenient. When your survival becomes a threat to the comfort of others. He turned to Queen Veshra. She watched him with the unblinking intensity of a predator waiting for its pack leader to decide the fate of a trembling herd. I want them to see restraint, he said quietly. To witness power that doesn't need to dominate. Veshra bowed her massive, horned head once. The other beasts stepped back. Slowly. Deliberately. One by one, they turned from the trembling judges and returned to the breach in the tribunal wall, like a tide receding. A single song lion paused beside a young security officer who had collapsed in terror, his weapon discarded. The creature regarded him with eyes like black crystal, then let out a deep thrumming note, just enough to rattle his bones, just enough to be remembered. Then it too disappeared into the corridor. Elias faced the tribunal once more. You sentenced me to death. Now I return the favor. Not in kind, but in permanence. He raised his hand. A pulse rippled through the floor, subtle, almost gentle. Then came a sound from deep beneath the station. It wasn't an explosion. It was a shift. Metal realigning. Pressure systems rerouted. Emergency overrides initiated. Queen Veshra's voice filled the chamber again. The station has been claimed by the Packworld Accord. Your authority is dissolved. Your comms will remain disabled until we are gone. Your judgment will be recorded and archived under the Concord of Apex Sovereignty. Elias walked toward the center of the tribunal floor. The same place where his execution had nearly been carried out. You feared what we might become, he said. But you never imagined what we might choose not to become. That was always your weakness. He looked up toward the cracked dome, where stars blinked back into view as the largest creatures outside dispersed, leaving the tribunal intact but marked. Change. Power isn't what destroys, Elias murmured. It's what refuses to. He stepped onto a glowing platform that rose from the floor, reshaped by the biological systems now overriding the tribunal's architecture. The beasts had never needed to take territory by force. They simply made it unrecognizable to its former owners. The platform lifted Elias toward the breach where Veshra waited. She extended a clawed hand again. He gripped it. Below, the judges stood stunned, their robes torn, their status crumbling with each breath. Will you return? One of them called, uncertain, voice trembling. Elias didn't answer right away. He stood in the breach with one foot in shadow, the other still inside their world. For a heartbeat he seemed to hesitate. Then he said without turning, only if you repeat the mistake. And with that, he vanished into the dark with the Queen of Predators and the silent guardians of the Death Worlds. Outside, the apex species peeled away from orbit, their silence louder than any war horn. No weapons fired. No ships pursued. The galaxy would speak of it for generations. How the last human was sentenced to death. And the predators answered. The stars above the tribunal burned quietly, unaware they had just witnessed a rebirth. Below, within the hollowed corridors of what was once considered the most secure structure in the galactic core, silence hung like ash. The tribunal was broken, not by war but by truth. Its judges, delegates, and advisors stood in place long after the predators had gone, as if moving too quickly might invite their return. No one dared speak of victory. Because there hadn't been one. There had only been mercy. Elias Reign stood aboard the living ship that had carried Queen Veshra through the void, an apex construct grown, not built. It breathed beneath his boots, its walls softly pulsing with light and memory. Every vein in the floor shimmered with heat, every panel responded to touch like muscle beneath skin. He watched through the viewport as the tribunal became smaller, more insignificant, swallowed by the black core. The massive razor beast who had once whimpered under Elias's hand as a pup, stood beside him now. Fully grown, armored, eyes reflective but not empty. He sat on his haunches like a sentinel and made no sound. I never wanted this, Elias said aloud. The creature gave a low rumble, not disagreement, not comfort, but acknowledgement. Behind them Veshra approached. She moved with regal purpose, talons clicking softly against the organic deck. Her armor had relaxed, the battle form receded. Now she wore the appearance of a sovereign rather than a weapon. Her many eyes flickered with emotion, strange and unknowable. You could have given the signal, she said. I know. You had the right. He turned and for the first time in hours, let weariness seep into his posture. His shoulders slumped slightly. His hands trembled just enough for her to notice. Would it have mattered? He asked. Veshra tilted her head. In the short term? You would have wiped out your judges. Your executioners. Maybe toppled 3 fleets, 6 empires. The galaxy would fear your name again. And in the long term? They would have called it confirmation. He nodded. There was a pause. Even the ship stilled as if giving them space to breathe. I needed them to see restraint, Elias murmured. But more than that, I needed us to believe in it. Veshra stepped forward, placing a single clawed hand on his shoulder. She was careful, aware of her strength. They believe now. No, he said quietly. They're terrified. That's not belief. That's survival instinct. He walked to the edge of the chamber and stared into the stars again. I don't want to rule through fear. That's what they expected. That's what they were prepared to fight. But if we build something new, something better, then they'll have to face what they've become. And if they don't? She asked. He didn't answer. Kor stood and padded toward him. The big creature didn't growl, didn't posture. He simply nudged Elias gently with his head, like he had as a juvenile in the ashes of that crash so many years ago. It grounded him. Brought him back. I need time, Elias said. You have it, Veshra replied. The pack worlds awake your voice. He turned to her, finally facing the queen not as a rescued convict, not as a figurehead but as an equal. I never asked to lead. I just wanted a place to live without being hunted. Veshra's many eyes studied him. And yet, every species we rescued calls you kin. That's not leadership. That's trust. And it can't be bought with fear. She regarded him for a long moment, then inclined her head. You'll never be one of us. Not entirely. But you are something rare. You made us believe there could be more than war. Elias smiled faintly. I made myself believe it. A chime echoed through the chamber. The ship had received a pulse, one of the biological markers sent through non-digital channels. One of the Packworld colonies had reported movement. A fleet was being repositioned. Quietly. Subtly. He didn't ask which empire. It didn't matter. They'll test us, he said. They already have. Kor growled low. Elias placed a hand on the creature's side, steadying him. I want to speak to the others, Elias said. The species that weren't invited to the tribunal. The ones that didn't have a voice. The prey. The outcasts. The systems too far flung for diplomacy but close enough to feel the pain. Veshra smiled in the way her kind did, without lips, without teeth, just a slow expansion of the outer ridges of her skull and a shift in her posture. You're building a coalition. No, Elias said. I'm building a future. One where Deathworlders aren't a curse word. One where apex doesn't mean exile. He stepped back into the center of the chamber. And if the old empires can't handle that? Veshra's eyes gleamed. Then we remind them why the stars feared Earth. Elias didn't smile. He didn't need to. He turned, placed a hand on the bioconsole and sent the first message. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just a simple phrase, broadcast in over 5,000 languages, from the mouths of apex species who had once known only silence. The hunted have chosen to speak. And this time they would not be interrupted.